I want to begin with the continued decimation of the administrative state. Elon Musk is still going hard on USAID, which, as we know, provides humanitarian assistance all over the world. The latest report, this is courtesy of Reuters, says that 294 USAID workers are going to be staying on. The original count for this workforce being 10,000. President Donald Trump's administration plans to keep fewer than 300 staff at the U.S. Agency for International Development out of the agency's worldwide total of more than 10,000, sources told Reuters on Thursday. Washington's primary humanitarian aid agency has been a target of a government reorganization program spearheaded by businessman Elon Musk, a close Trump ally since the Republican president took office on January 20th. Make no mistake about it, this is not government reorganization. This is Elon Musk personally going through each government agency and getting rid of all of the ones that he either doesn't like or all of the ones that don't prioritize one of his companies when it comes to government contracts. Keep in mind, Doge has yet to even think about talking about the Department of Defense, which statistically is the most wasteful government agency, considering they failed 7 audits in a row and can't account for 61% of their money. If that is not your first order of business, I do not entertain you as a serious individual. All this administration wants to do is strain relations on the global. They want to strain global relations. They want to fuck over poor, lower income, and old people, as well as people on benefits like SNAP and WIC, as we saw with President Trump's funding freeze. The 4 sources familiar with the plan said only 294 staff at the agency would be allowed to keep their jobs, including 12 in Africa and 8 in Asia. Quote, "That's outrageous," said J. Brian Atwood, who served as head of USAID for more than 6 years, adding the mass termination of personnel would effectively kill an agency that has helped tens of millions of people around the world from dying. This is key because the president, as it stands right now, does not have unilateral authority to shutter certain agencies. Closing a big agency or abolishing the Department of Ed, for example, would require congressional approval. But what they're going to do is just basically make these companies impossible to run by reducing the workforce by almost 100%. Although USAID, will technically remain open, they won't be able to provide any sort of assistance because they have like 1.2 people on staff to assist every country. A lot of people will not survive, said Atwood, now a senior fellow at Brown University's Watson Institute. The U.S. State Department did not respond to a request for comment. Another aspect of this, or what their intention for this, is to put USAID under the State Department umbrella, under Marco Rubio's command. Even though he won't oversee day-to-day operations, he will have final say in whatever kinds of decisions they want to make. With Trump and Musk, the world's wealthiest man, leveling false accusations that his staff were criminals, dozens of staff had been put on leave, hundreds of internal contractors had been laid off, and life-saving programs around the world have been left in limbo. The administration announced on Tuesday it was going to put on leave all directly hired USAID employees globally and recall thousands of personnel working overseas. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said the administration was identifying and designating programs that would be exempted from the sweeping stop work orders, which have threatened efforts around the globe to stop the spread of disease, prevent famine, and otherwise alleviate poverty. Implementing partners of USAID are facing financial trouble on the back of stop work orders from the State Department. The overhaul will upend thousands of staff and their families. The administration's goal is to merge USAID with the State Department, led by Rubio, who Trump has made acting USAID administrator. However, it is not clear that he can merge the agencies unless Congress votes to do so, since USAID was created and funded by laws that remain in place. USAID employed more than 10,000 people around the world, two-thirds of them working outside the United States, according to the Congressional Research Service. It managed more than $40 billion in fiscal 2023, the most recent year for which there is complete data. Sources familiar with the agency on Thursday said some workers have begun receiving termination notices. The USAID website said that as of midnight on Friday, February 7th, quote, all USAID direct hire personnel will be placed on administrative leave globally, with the exception of designated personnel responsibility for mission critical functions, core leadership, and specially designated programs. It said essential personnel expected to continue working would be informed by Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. The agency provided aid to some 130 countries in 2023, many of them shattered by conflict and deeply impoverished. The top recipients were Ukraine, followed by Ethiopia, Jordan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Yemen, and Afghanistan, according to a CRS report. The United States wants to stop giving aid to countries all across the world except Israel. Whenever these talks have come up, whenever there are discussions of reducing the budget, cutting expenses, every country is subject except Israel. Furthermore, they're not going to do anything worthwhile domestically with this money either. They're going to find a way to shuffle it to all of the folks within different government agencies, whether that be to Elon Musk, whether that be to people within the EPA who work to legislate more pro-fossil fuel regulations. I don't inherently have an issue with foreign aid. I do believe that the United States government should prioritize the safety and the well-being and improve the quality of life domestically. I think that first and foremost should be their priority. But when it comes to aid, I don't have issues with humanitarian aid. If you're sending money to build wells in Africa, for example, or you're researching how to develop vaccines to limit the spread of deadly infectious diseases, I don't mind that. My issue is when foreign aid funds 70% of the world's dictatorships. My issue with foreign aid is that it goes to Israel and not Palestine. Like how we give all this aid to Ukraine, which is fine. It may be a little too much, but it's still fine. They're fighting against an oppressive force, but it's never applied in a coherent manner. And now they're just what's beyond the ramifications of this from a human perspective. Donald Trump always talks about America being respected on the global stage, but every move he makes reflects poorly on this country, and this is one of them. This, combined with him floating tariffs on the EU, with him threatening to buy Greenland, this is the Republican Party's worst nightmare, because all it does is further push countries into the Chinese sphere of influence. The United States, the United States government is so worried about the rise of China that they are not trying to bolster and create new partnerships that aren't reliant on violence. When China does imperialism, they don't do the same style of imperialism that the U.S. does. The U.S. will go to a developing country and put a military base there, whereas China will go to a developing country and put an airport there, or they'll build infrastructure, whether it's, electrical grids, ports, whatever. The developing country gets fucked either way. But when China does the fucking, there is at least a tangible benefit for the people that live in that country. There's no benefit to putting a military base in a developing country for that developing country. Now, there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about USAID and about like the theory of what it does. I want to talk about some of the specifics. What impact does USAID have around the globe? This is courtesy of Time Magazine. Protecting the Amazon rainforest and fighting cocaine in South America. USAID has been critical in providing humanitarian assistance in Colombia, conservation efforts in the Brazilian Amazon, and coca eradication in Peru. Recent USAID money has also supported emergency humanitarian aid to more than 2.8 million Venezuelans who fled economic crisis. In 2024 alone, the agency transferred some 45 million to the UN World Food Program, mostly to assist Venezuelans. In Brazil, USAID's largest initiative is the Partnership for the Conservation of Amazon Biodiversity, which focuses on conservation and improving livelihoods for indigenous peoples and other rainforest communities. Keep in mind, the rainforest is the single most important area on the globe when it comes to environmentally, when it comes to all of the carbon that it pulls out of the atmosphere. Obviously, it's not enough because we're expediting climate change we're expediting climate change each and every day, that we're hyper reliant on fossil fuels. But the Amazon is a hugely important region. It's a hugely important piece of the environment. Over in Peru, part of USAID's $135 million funding in 2024 was dedicated to financing cocaine production alternatives such as coffee and cacao. The humanitarian agency has been seeking to curb production of the drug since the early 1980s. Disease response, girls' education, and free school lunches in Africa. Last year, the U.S. gave the sub-Saharan region more than $6.5 billion in humanitarian assistance. But since Trump's announcement, HIV patients in Africa found locked doors at clinics funded by an acclaimed U.S. program that helped rein in the global AIDS epidemic. Known as one of the world's most successful foreign aid program, the President's Emergency Relief Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, has been credited with saving more than 25 million lives, largely in Africa. The world is baffled, said Aaron Matsola. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, brother. I apologize. The health minister of South Africa, the country with the largest number of people living with HIV after the U.S. freeze on aid. He says that the U.S. funds nearly 20% of the $2.3 billion needed each year to run South Africa's HIV/AIDS program through PEPFAR, and now the biggest response to a single disease in history is under threat. Halting U.S. aid could also have a dire impact on the humanitarian situation in eastern Congo, where American aid funds access to food, water, electricity, and basic health care for 4.6 million people displaced by years of conflict. European nations are discussing increasing aid, but a European diplomat told the AP that it will not make up for the loss for the U.S., the country's largest donor. In Ghana, the Chemonics International Development Group said it's pulling logistics programs in maternal and children's health, malaria response, and HIV. Education programs have been halted in Mali, a conflict-battered Western African nation where USAID has become the country's main humanitarian partner after others left following a 2021 coup. In civil war-torn Sudan, which is grappling with cholera, malaria, and measles, the aid freeze means 600,000 people will be at risk of catching and spreading those diseases. Countering Russian influence. This would be big, but Trump is buddy-buddy with Vladimir Putin. He's trying to turn the United States into its own version of Russia with their own style of government. USAID supports governance and media projects in countries where Russia exerts a large influence, such as Georgia and Armenia. Last year, it sharply increased support for programs in Armenia as the governor of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has sought to reduce links to Russia and strengthen ties with the United States and the European Union. The aid freeze means several independent broadcasters have been forced to cut some of their programs. Boris Navasardian, president of the Yerevan Press Club, said independent media, quote, could face a forced choice, end their existence, or seek sponsorship from political parties or big business. Very much like what we have in the United States. How cute. Hospitals in war-ravaged Syria. Doctors of the World Doctors of the World Turkey says it has been forced to lay off 300 staff and shutter 12 field hospitals it runs across northern Syria, a region devastated by years of war and a huge 2023 earthquake. Hakan Bilgin, the organization's president, said it relies on USAID for 60% of its funding and has had to cut its daily consultations from 5,000 to 500. Quote, as a medical organization providing life-saving services, you're basically saying close all the clinics, stop all your doctors, and you're not providing services to women, children, and the elderly. Bilgin said the impact on northern Syria, where millions rely on outside medical aid, could be catastrophic. Quote, the real impact is bigger than what we can measure now, he said in the group's Istanbul office, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and worried colleagues. Support for marginalized communities from the Balkans to Uganda and Kosovo, which has received more than $1 billion from USAID since 1999. Women's groups fear the impact of losing American funding for gender and diversity-related projects in the conservative country. This might leave women's groups stranded and unsupported, said Ariana Mustafa of the Kosovo Women's Network. Emina Bosnjak of the Sarajevo Open Center said USAID promotes awareness of discrimination, violence, and hate speech, and marginalized groups would suffer if that stops. Quote, stronger narratives that stand against human rights and stand against democracy and the rule of law will actually become more visible. A nonprofit organization supporting LGBTQ people in Uganda also feels under threat. Pius Kennedy, a program officer with the Kampala-based nonprofit Africa Queer Network, said he and 5 other permanent employees had been offered by USAID to stop work. He said the funding freeze could erase gains made in protecting sexual minorities in Uganda, one of more than 30 African countries where homosexuality is criminalized. Quote, we always look at the United States as something that we would always run to in case you are facing a number of insecurities in the country, Kennedy said, but that may no longer be safe. Support for media in Myanmar and mine clearance in Cambodia. The freeze of foreign assistance from USAID included $39 million for rights, democracy, and media in Myanmar, whose military seized power from the elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi in 2021, a human rights group said Thursday. The group Human Rights Myanmar said the frozen funds are, quote, vital for organizations challenging military rule and promoting democracy, which advance U.S. interests by upholding American values and countering China's authoritarian influence. Mark Zuckerberg, who was present at Donald Trump's inauguration, his company, this little company called Facebook, actually helped facilitate the genocide that is ongoing in Myanmar. Myanmar's military government is the most repressive in Southeast Asia, clamping down on free media, imprisoning thousands of nonviolent critics and political rivals, and carrying out a brutal war against pro-democracy resistance forces, heedless of civilian casualties. The U.S. has also frozen funding for landmine removal in Cambodia. In an illustration of the geopolitics of foreign aid, China has stepped in to fill the gap. This is exactly what's going to happen, guys. China is going to fill the humanitarian aid assistance that the U.S. is leaving open. China is going to rise to even further global prominence. And they're not doing this, again, any global superpower is not entirely altruistic in their actions, but they understand how important certain partnerships are. If you show to other countries that, yeah, you may have an authoritarian leadership, and I'm not saying that China is not authoritarian. Xi Jinping definitely has there is definitely an authoritarian slant to his governing style, but he isn't a far-right lunatic like some of the other folks that Donald Trump is aligning himself with. He's not as far right as Donald Trump intends to be. So China's going to swoop in. I don't know if they'll match monetarily. It's entirely possible. But they're going to fill the power vacuum that is quickly opening. Heng Ratana, Director General of Cambodian Mines Action Center, said China has released $4.4 million to support continuing demining operations in 7 Cambodian provinces. Days earlier, he has said demining programs in 8 other provinces that were funded by China had to stop. The last one is the wartime help in Ukraine. U.S. funding in Ukraine has helped to pay for fuel for evacuation vehicles, salaries for aid workers, legal and psychological support, and tickets to help evacuees reach safer locations. That includes the cost of using a concert hall in eastern Ukraine as a temporary center for civilians fleeing the relentless Russian bombardment. That center is now in peril because 60% of the costs, equivalent to about $7,000 US a month, were being covered by the United States. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his government expects 300 million to 400 million in aid to be cut. Most of that was for the energy sector that has been targeted by Russia. Remember when Donald Trump said that on day one he would have this war stopped? And here we are on February 7th, and the war is still ongoing. That's neat. Yeah, so obviously, this is going to be disastrous for the global community. The view of the United States globally was not always the greatest. I think countries across the globe recognize that the United States government, largely, when it comes to foreign policy, is one that might makes right, that the country with the biggest, baddest army is the world's police, and they can effectively do whatever they want. They can violate international law, they can violate treaties, but at least while all of that was going on, the previous leaders had enough wherewithal to recognize that maybe for every one bad thing you do two good things. And it will at least allow people to give you the benefit of the doubt. Or at least if you're helping these impoverished countries in Eastern Europe and in Africa, they'll be accepting of it. But now you're pulling all of that away. All of these countries realize that the United States is quickly devolving into a right-wing oligarchy, soon to be perhaps an authoritarian state. And they're just simply not going to want to fuck with the country that is so erratic when it comes to dismantling these partnerships, when it comes to abolishing these aid programs, and they're going to run right into the Chinese sphere of influence.